The shimmer screen door hissed open, revealing a panorama of the artificial sunset bleeding across the simulated sky. It was also bright and shiny, like someone had polished reality with a chrome paintbrush. I adjusted my faded Hawaiian shirt, feeling out of place as I watched the Paradiso glide into port. A perfect sheen of glaring light radiated from its impossibly smooth chrome hull as it approached. At 63, retirement had finally arrived, and this wasn't just any cruise. It was my inaugural voyage on what they called the future. I hadn't been able to afford anything like this when I was working, not with 3 kids in private school and a mortgage eating away at my soul like termites. But now, after a lifetime of fixing leaky faucets and unclogging things best expunged from polite conversation, I was here aboard humanity's first fully automated cruise liner. 2 weeks of floating luxury amongst the stars. It was all thanks to my late wife Nora, leaving me a tidy nest egg, and her insistence on never letting anything go to waste. "Don't you dare let that good money sit in some dusty bank account," she'd rasped from beneath her oxygen mask, clutching my hand like it was the last life raft on a sinking ship. "Go see something new. Do something stupid." Stupid. Leaving the only inhabitable planet in the solar system to gallivant about the lifeless void of space did seem pretty stupid to me. The boarding process was less queue up and more step into the light beam. A scanner that looked like a giant jellyfish pulsed turquoise as I walked through, then spat me out onto an impossibly smooth floor that felt warm beneath my worn loafers. No carpets here, just polished panels that seemed to ripple with internal currents of some unseen liquid metal. The whole ship was a dizzying spectacle of chrome and glass, punctuated by impossible gardens bursting with luminous flora that hummed softly like 1,000 cicadas in heat stroke. The air smelled a bit too sterile, but not unpleasant. More like ozone after a summer storm. I kept catching glimpses of people moving through walls, their forms losing focus for an instant before solidifying on the other side. Teleportation? Some kind of fancy hologram thingamajig? It didn't matter, it was all just wow. The corridors hummed with alien quietude. No creaking decks or drunken laughter spilling from open doorways. Just this low thrumming from the heart of the colossal machine. I wandered past mirrored corridors that stretched on forever, reflecting back a pale ghost in faded khaki shorts and socks pulled a little bit too high. I found my cabin tucked away in what they called Deck 7. It wasn't so much a room as a pod, bathed in pale blue light that shifted with some unseen rhythm. The bed looked like some sort of sensory deprivation chamber. Smooth white surface, no sheets or blankets, but I'd been assured it would adjust to my body heat and sleep preferences. Sleep preference? I muttered to myself, feeling suddenly old-fashioned. What the hell does that even mean? The first few days were a blur of bewilderment. Meals materialized on demand from gleaming pods in the walls. You just pointed at what you wanted on some glowing screen and it popped out piping hot. The drinks dispensed themselves into crystal goblets, swirling with colors I couldn't really name. There was even an automated bartender sculpted from what looked like liquid silver, but it wasn't very talkative. Then there was her, leaning against a chrome railing overlooking what looked like an endless sapphire ocean, but was probably more like some hyper-realistic projection. She had hair the color of polished copper, cascading down past shoulders that may as well have been sculpted from marble in moonlight. Even at this distance, I could see the faint shimmer of bioluminescent tattoos crawling up her arms, little constellations against skin so unbelievably smooth. She must have noticed me staring. "Enjoying the cosmic kale smoothie?" she asked, tilting her head at mine in what I hoped was a friendly way. I choked down a mouthful of the green goop that tasted suspiciously like spinach and grass clippings. "It's refreshing," I managed, feeling my face flush hotter than the sun outside. "Never had anything quite like it." "Apparently," she said with a chime-like laugh. "Call me Bear." She extended a hand, long fingers tipped with nails that shimmered like polished gemstones. "Marcus," I stammered, grasping hers in my own clammy grip. Her skin was warm and smooth beneath mine, almost unsettlingly so. "Marcus Weiss." "Pleasure," she said, her eyes holding mine for a beat too long. "So, Marcus Weiss, what brings you to the Paradiso?" I opened my mouth to launch into some carefully improvised spiel about finally taking that dream retirement trip, and then promptly forgot about it all. All I could think of was how her nails reflected the glow given off by her tattoos. I choked out something about Nora and the bank account, then continued with something that only sounded suave in my head. "Well," I blurted out, "I always wanted to see what space travel would be like without having to wear one of them." My hand flailed helplessly. "Those big helmets." Bear's smile wavered for just an instant before she recovered with a practiced grace that made me feel even more inept than usual. "Ah," she said, tilting her head again, and I swear the faint light of her tattoos seemed to pulse in sympathy. "You're one of those old-timers who likes it authentic." "Authentic?" She let out another chime-like laugh, a happy sigh escaping from an airlock. "Don't worry," she said, squeezing my hand lightly before withdrawing it with the speed of a startled viper. "It's just charming." I was trying to remember if I'd ever even been charming at some point in my life when she asked if I'd care for a drink at the bar, with the same silver mixologist that basically poisoned me with the kale smoothie. "Sure," I croaked, feeling suddenly bold enough to add, "if you're buying." She raised her eyebrows, then tilted her head again in what I hoped was amusement rather than pity. "You drive a hard bargain for a man who looks like he could have a heart attack at any moment and thinks astronauts wear big glass helmets." That one got me laughing, loud enough to make some passing androids pause their silent glide along the mirrored corridor with startled little whirring noises. Bear laughed too, her eyes crinkling at the corners like folded paper lilies, her skin showing the mildest of imperfections for the first time. We talked for hours in that bar. She told me about working with some kind of advanced bioprinting tech back on Earth, and how she loved the way space smelled, like an unending storm and something that made her think of old coins. I was pretty sure space didn't smell like anything, but I didn't question it. I told her about fixing up cars in my garage, not knowing if fixing was even the right word anymore when most people were dealing with self-driving hoverpods and whatnot. "Come," she said, extending her manicured hand towards me. "I know this place with an amazing view." She didn't say where this place was, but I wasn't about to argue. It took a few awkward moments and some fumbling for the right buttons on the panel by the bar before we were both standing in what looked like a glorified observation deck overlooking the swirling nebula of space beyond one impossibly large window. It felt intimate somehow, despite being surrounded by hundreds of other pods that shimmered with their own occupants, watching the same view. Bear leaned against the railing beside me, her copper hair catching on some kind of internal light source and making it seem like she was woven from spun starlight itself. I tried to think of something witty to say about the cosmic ballet outside, but all that came out was, "It's pretty." She turned then, those storm dust eyes boring into mine with a sudden intensity that made my breath catch in my throat. "You know," she said softly, her voice dropping an octave lower than before and somehow even more unsettlingly beautiful, "I've never seen anyone quite like you on this ship." She tilted her head again, the same way Audrey Hepburn did when someone had just told a particularly bad joke in one of those old movies I used to watch with my wife. "Like me?" I stammered, feeling suddenly very aware of how much older than everyone else here I was. "Yes," she said softly, stepping closer until the scent of posh perfume and something faintly industrial hit me full force, like a hot welding torch had been left burning in an abandoned florist shop. "You smell interesting." She reached out then, her opaline nails grazing my cheekbone with a cool touch. "Interesting?" I managed to croak out. It was all I could think of at the time. It wasn't exactly what you wanted someone to say when they were leaning in close enough for their breath to intermingle with yours. Her perfume smelled of something vaguely fruity, but with a rich undercurrent that reminded me of a lilac bush. "Yes," she murmured again, her lips brushing against my earlobe as if testing its temperature. "Like old books." I froze there for a moment, staring at her clumsily, trying to figure out what the hell an old book smell even meant in this context before deciding it didn't matter. By the time we stumbled back to my cabin, it felt like I'd known Bear forever. She hadn't said no when I invited her, and that was something of a victory in itself, considering she had just told me I smelled like old books. She was like a storm of youthful nostalgia. She reminded me of honeysuckle growing wild by a rusty fence post, a scene so familiar and evocative of home, yet very alien in this chrome world. I fumbled for her hand as we stepped inside, and the moment our fingers touched, it was like someone had flipped on a dimmer switch in my head. Everything felt softer, warmer, brighter somehow. I wanted to kiss her right there by the door, but in truth, I was just too much of a coward. It took another couple of awkward moments with buttons and shimmering panels before we were both inside the bedroom proper, bathed in its soft blue glow from both the lighting and Bear's own ambience. She looked around at it all, not quite dismissive, but definitely curious, as if wondering what kind of strange little nest a man who smelled like old books would choose to inhabit. "It's efficient," she said finally, her voice echoing oddly in the smooth space. "Efficient?" I echoed back, feeling suddenly self-conscious about my worn loafers and faded Hawaiian shirt that was probably considered vintage even by old folks back on Earth. She smiled then, a real smile, not one of those polite ones she'd been giving me before, and it made her storm dust eyes look almost friendly. "Yes," she said again, stepping closer to me as if drawn by some high-tech pheromone produced by my old book smell. "Efficiently cozy." She tilted her head back then and closed her eyes for a moment like someone about to take a deep breath of fresh air, before coming back in full force, this time pressing herself against me so close my arm felt as if it were tangled up in an unyielding flytrap. "I want to know more," she murmured into my earlobe, and I swear her breath smelled like a bouquet of overripe bananas dipped in molten metal this time. It was then, as we stood there pressed together under the understated blue glow of the walls, that I realized what an interesting smell truly was. There was a definite smell of decay that was suddenly clinging to everything around us. A faint whiff of forgotten lives and long-lost meals left on trays in those old metal hospital beds they used back when hospitals still smelled like funk and fear, instead of whatever this sterile place was supposed to emulate. It wasn't just me or Bear who smelled interesting. It was the whole damn room. The slow burn of nausea creeping through its polished chrome arteries. I suddenly felt very, very embarrassed. Here was this beautiful woman trapped in this glittering coffin of a bedroom in space, with nothing but an old book-smelling man and burnt banana bouquets to assault her senses. She pulled back from me in a startle as she began to smell it too. Another whiff of sour bananas washed over us before she looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite decipher. "You know," she said softly, getting up and stepping back from me as if suddenly afraid of being too close to something that might bite. Or perhaps it just smelled a little too much like the inside of some old grandfather's attic after he died, and they finally opened up all the dusty trunks. "Maybe we should try this again later." Then she was gone before I could even manage to sputter out an agreement. I lay there for a minute or two watching the spot where she'd been, feeling like someone had just switched off a spotlight on me and left me standing in front of a very confused audience who were all suddenly wondering if they'd misjudged my opening act. It was then that I returned my olfactory attention to the smell clinging to the air around my pod bed with an almost sickening persistence. The faintest whiff of old books burning in some kind of antique wood stove, and a sour undercurrent that smelled exactly like burnt banana peels mixed with decay. And for just a moment, as I lay there blinking at the blue glow emanating from the impossibly smooth and sterile walls, I thought maybe she wasn't so wrong about me smelling interesting after all, and I was just finally noticing my own old man smell or all too public body odor. The lighting seemed to mock me, turning my Hawaiian shirt into some kind of faded nebula and highlighting every crease in my loafers. I ran a hand through my hair, already starting to feel like old straw, even with that biogel they pumped into my scalp at the station before we left Earth. "Damn you, old books," I muttered under my breath. It wasn't just her retreat that stung. It was the way she'd look back over her shoulder, as if about to say something more, then decided against it. The whole thing reeked of a missed opportunity. Like trying to impress someone with your vintage vinyl collection, only for them to discover they don't really like old things after all. I removed my loafers and stalked around the pod room, my bare feet slapping softly against the polished floor as I tried to pinpoint the source of the damn smell. It wasn't coming from me, at least not directly. The shampoo-soap combo they offered in the showers supposedly did a decent job of neutralizing personal odors. It was more like an echo clinging to everything in here, amplified by some kind of weird resonance from whatever invisible porous ventilation existed in the polished walls. I checked the air filters, pristine as always, humming softly with that reassuringly stable hum only a good filtration system could manage, and sniffed at my own clothes again just for kicks. Old books? Maybe. But definitely not mixed with burnt banana peels and decay like some kind of cosmic fruit salad gone wrong. The scent was strongest near the pod bed itself, and I ran my hand over its smooth surface, finding nothing amiss beneath those shimmering panels that hid all the mechanical gubbins. The same went for the wall units. Checked every vent and panel on them too. Even pulled out a couple of spare filters from their little storage compartments just to be sure. Nothing. I had already triple-checked my armpits. The stupid stench was like some kind of invisible ghost clinging to my pod room with a tenacity that would make a banshee blush. It had to be coming from somewhere else. Something external leaking in through the hole, maybe? But the ship was in the vacuum of space. I pulled on one of those flimsy jumpsuits they issued for emergencies and headed down the corridor towards the service hatch leading to the lower levels. It was probably just some kind of plumbing issue or a faulty vent seal letting off that burnt banana bouquet from whatever recycling system we had crammed into the ship's bowels. I could almost hear her voice echoing behind me. It's efficient. And it felt more like a taunt than a joke as I pushed open the hatch. A rusty hiss of compressed air escaped as I stepped down into the labyrinthine network of pipes and conduits that snaked through the ship's underbelly. It was a little disconcerting going below deck, because it felt like you were descending not just physically but also culturally. Up on the main decks with their polished chrome and shimmering windows, we pretended to be some kind of spacefaring aristocracy, sipping cocktails under artificial starlight. While down here? Well, down here was where they kept the ship's guts, its greasy heart pumping recycled air and turning over bio-waste into something vaguely resembling fertilizer for that hydroponics garden up on Deck 9. I flicked a switch to activate my helmet lamp, casting an anemic yellow light across rusted pipes crisscrossing overhead, like some kind of skeletal jungle gym, and took a necessary deep breath, trying to filter out the expected industrial tang mixed with stale recycled air. It was definitely stronger now, that burnt banana bouquet mingled with decay and something else I couldn't quite place. Maybe old engine oil, or, well, maybe just more old books burning in some forgotten corner of the ship's soul. I started to move deeper into the maze, following a particularly pungent trail of it, as if drawn by a smelly compass needle pointing towards its source. It wasn't like I had anything better to do, not with my pod room smelling faintly like an antique bookstore that had caught fire and then been doused in banana smoothies. So maybe this was just another way for the universe to remind me what a lonely fool I'd become out here amongst these dying stars. The deeper I plunged into the ship's guts, the more that piquant tang morphed into something almost savory, like overcooked liver and onions simmering in engine grease. It was definitely getting stronger, though. Every few paces it would hit me with a fresh wave of burnt banana, decay, and whatever else lurked beneath those greasy metal tendrils overhead. I passed by banks of blinking indicator lights that looked like some kind of bioluminescent coral reef growing on the bulkhead. Mostly green, but punctuated here and there by angry red ones, flashing frantically as if trying to semaphore a message in Morse code that I couldn't quite decipher. There were also these strange bulbous things hanging from struts every few meters, translucent sacks filled with something that pulsed faintly like an overripe melon left out in the galley counter too long. I vaguely remembered reading somewhere about them being a kind of biofilter for the recycled air. Maybe they ate ozone or something? Whatever it was, their sickly yellow glow and pulsating insides gave me a distinct feeling I'd rather not be breathing whatever gas those things were processing right now. A couple of times I even thought I saw movement in the shadows cast by my helmet lamp. Quick flickers behind bulkheads or at the edges of my vision, but it always turned out to be just some stray length of wiring swaying gently from a loose clamp, catching in the light like a phantom tentacle. I was starting to feel like one of those deep-sea explorers they showed on holovids, poking around in that black abyss with nothing much more than their lights and suits and an unsettling sense of being watched by things bigger than themselves. Except down here, it wasn't crushing pressure or some monstrous cephalopod you had to worry about, but mostly just a nagging fear that I was going to get tangled up in a hydraulic hose and end up squeezed like a tube of toothpaste while someone on Deck 7 wondered why they hadn't seen me for the last 3 days. Finally, after what felt like navigating through an entire graveyard of forgotten shipboard appliances, I found it. The source wasn't some leaking pipe or busted vent, but a thick maintenance hatch set into one of those broad steel bulkheads that seemed to divide the whole lower level from the rest of the ship. It was slightly ajar, and the smell, well, let's just say it hit me like a physical blow. Burnt banana peels mixed with decay, engine oil, and something distinctly reminiscent of good old BO. I knelt down beside it, my gloved hand hovering over the latch. I was both curious and trepidatious of what might be waiting on the other side. It wasn't just the stench that was making me hesitate. There was also this faint rhythmic thrumming coming from within, like a muffled heartbeat, or maybe some kind of internal engine idling too low in its stroke. Taking another regrettable deep breath, I forced myself to pull open the hatch and peered inside. The light from my helmet lamp barely penetrated more than a couple of feet into the beefy shaft beyond it, but what little I could see was enough to make me forget about all the luxuries of the Paradiso and scream for them to just throw me in a rusty old freighter and take me home. It wasn't an engine room or a storage bay. Not exactly. It looked more like one of those massive vats they used on Earth for processing something called algal protein, except this thing was crammed full of writhing, pulsing things that were definitely neither algae nor protein. They were vaguely humanoid in shape, but stretched and contorted into grotesque angles, as if someone had taken a bunch of rubber mannequins and run them through an industrial meat grinder before stuffing them back together again with glue sticks. They weren't dead, though, at least not all of them. Some twitched faintly in the dim light, their pale skins stretched taut over those skeletal limbs like cellophane wrapping around a particularly knobby melon. Others were more active, thrashing against each other in that crowded space, sending spurts of something viscous and oily from between their ribs and down across the metal floor. It left glistening trails down their torsos that shimmered faintly under my lamplight. And then there was that smell, the same smell amplified to extremes. Burnt banana peels mixed with decay, engine oil, yes, but also a cloying sweetness like overripe fruit rotting in some forgotten corner of the galley. It was then that I noticed the faint glow coming from their chests. Not bioluminescent like bears' tattoos, but more like a sickly yellow phosphorescence that pulsed in time with their ragged heartbeats echoing through the shaft. Their reality clicked into place. This wasn't just some kind of biological fuel source they were using to power our fancy-pants zero-point drives and hyper-jump engines. These things weren't being burned. They were being sucked. They were somehow alive in that vat, kept alive to be squeezed dry of whatever it was being manufactured in their pulsing yellow chests and bellies. I finally stumbled back from the hatch, my stomach churning like a centrifuge full of cheap synthetic gruel and bile rising up into my throat. I'd known about biofuel. Everyone did these days. Even had that little biomass contribution quota you were supposed to meet every cycle with your food waste. But this was something else entirely. It wasn't a processed slurry or algae bloom. It was them. Whatever those things were down there in the dark, they weren't just fuel. They were being consumed from within while spoiled rich girls drank magic cocktails up above. My hand went for the latch, slamming it shut on the hidden nightmare. I had to get back up there before someone else came poking around. Maybe even one of those cheery little service drones that checked on guests would expose my trespass. One was probably already buzzing its way through whatever sensor grid covered this level of the ship, looking for any sign of trouble it could investigate. But then I heard something else, a metallic clang followed by muffled cursing from just beyond that hatchway. Someone coming down towards me. Not a drone or a robot, too heavy-footed and slow for that. A human, judging by the scuff of boots on metal grating and the rhythmic thumping of what sounded like an oxygen recycler. Panic tightened its grip around my chest like a hydraulic clamp. I couldn't let anyone else see this, not yet anyway. Not until I was away from this place and in familiar company. I scrambled back towards the maintenance tunnel I'd come through, hoping against hope that whatever had been leaking wouldn't have triggered some kind of automatic shutdown of this whole section. But as soon as my gloved hand brushed a control panel to check, the shaft ahead was flooded with harsh white light, and then filled by a booming robotic voice crackling over the intercom.
Attention maintenance personnel. This sector is now designated High-Risk Biohazard Zone Alpha 2. All non-essential personnel, please evacuate immediately.
Great. Just great. I triggered some kind of lockdown protocol before even getting back to the civilian decks. And whoever was coming down here wasn't just going anywhere until the problem, which perhaps included myself, was remedied, pressed on by that automated voice echoing off the bulkheads like a klaxon in an opera house. I shoved past another tangle of hydraulic hoses and found myself jammed against one of those massive steel doors, the kind they use to seal off cargo bays or engine rooms when you needed something really quiet for a while. There was no way I could squeeze through that narrow gap before whoever it was reached me, not with this bulky suit on. Then he came into view around the bend in the tunnel. One of those stocky engineering types they probably kept stationed down here to handle all the greasy guts and gunk that nobody else wanted to touch. He had a thick beard bristling out from under his helmet like some kind of winter caterpillar, and was wiping sweat off his brow with what looked like an oily rag he probably used for wiping everything else too. He stopped dead when he saw me jammed against the bulkhead door, a look of pure bewilderment twisting up under his visor. He opened his mouth to say something, maybe even ask what I was doing down here away from the splendor of the passenger decks. But then he looked deeper into the tunnel. His helmet lamp illuminated the maintenance hatch just behind me, and the oily trails snaking across the floor like an eldritch lava flow. His eyes widened, his multi-rag slipping from his hand to audibly plop onto the metal grating. He took a step back, muttering something under his breath. Then he started backing away from me in earnest, as if not wanting to deal with the situation or showing me some compassion. I believed for a moment that I was in the clear, but he apparently received an order in his helmet instructing him to apprehend, kill, or otherwise dispose of me as he ended his retreat. I stood face to face with the mechanic, his eyes darting nervously around the dimly lit room. We both knew I had seen something I shouldn't have. Tortured, grotesque creatures writhing in a vat below decks on this wicked ship masquerading as a floating paradise. The mechanic shifted uncomfortably from foot to foot, clearly torn between his orders and some shred of conscience.
"You didn't see anything,"
he muttered half-heartedly, making no obvious move to stop me from leaving the restricted area. But then something in his eyes hardened. He reached for his belt where I now noticed a holstered weapon. In that split second, my mind raced through possible escape routes and weapons at hand, none of which were promising given my age and physical state after a failed night of drinking with Bear. The mechanic stepped forward with surprising speed for such a burly man. Instinct took over as I sidestepped his grasp and grabbed the nearest object within reach. An empty metal bucket probably used to collect fluid leaks from the machinery surrounding us. I threw it wildly at him, connecting with some part of his head or chin in a satisfying clang that sent him staggering back more out of shock than injury. Seizing my chance, I darted behind the creature vat, ominously silent beside me. The mechanic shook off the blow and charged again, this time drawing his weapon, some kind of taser or stun rod by its appearance. I snatched up a length of pipe lying nearby with trembling hands just as he rounded the vat's edge. We circled each other warily like prize fighters in that cramped space between machinery, him brandishing his electric prod and me gripping my makeshift club. My heart hammered against my ribs, but there was no time for fear now, only survival instinct. He was visibly agitated at this point as he failed to detain an old man in loafers, and I swung the pipe ham-handedly at his head. He ducked under my attack easily this time, but stumbled slightly, giving me an opening to press forward into him before he could regain balance or aim his stun rod in the right direction. We grappled fiercely for control over the weapons as we crashed against one another in a tangle of limbs and grunts of exertion. In desperation, I thrust my knee up hard between his legs with all my strength, feeling something give way tenderly beneath the impact. The mechanic crumpled on the floor, gasping and retching, but still conscious enough to claw at me as I wrenched free from our embrace. I prodded him with his own electric rod to ensure he stayed down. Seizing him under the armpits before he could recover, I hauled his limp form towards the edge of the creature vat with a strength born purely of adrenaline. I held my breath as I exposed the creatures to open air once again. His eyes widened in realization just before I tipped him over into the churning mass below with a heavy thud and gurgle that made my stomach turn even as relief flooded through me. The creatures within immediately began thrashing violently at this new intruder. For a moment, he just lay there, covering his face weakly. I closed the hatch before I could witness anything more. I staggered back from the edge of the vat, chest heaving and hands shaking uncontrollably now that it was over. There would be no hiding what had happened here forever, but perhaps I could still find a way to blend in as an ignoramus. I could hear myself panting as I scrambled back towards the tunnel, adrenaline making every joint feel like it was trying to crack its way out of some kind of hydraulic casing. The same message continued to boom down from somewhere above, instructing everyone to leave. And I was doing just that. I propelled my body forward until I burst back into the main corridor, and could practically feel myself being sucked towards one of those glowing blue vortexes leading back to the upper decks. Probably where all the other passengers were still blissfully unaware they'd just boarded a floating biohazard containment unit for their transgalactic cruise. I was halfway through that swirling portal when I thought of her again, standing by the railing on the observation deck, looking out at some distant nebula with its simulated stellar glow. Probably one of those supernova remnants she'd been gushing about earlier in the bar. And in that moment in my mind, She seemed like nothing more than a child watching a cartoon. I almost smiled, then thought better of it. I wondered if she'd even care when she inevitably found out what had been happening beneath her feet while she sipped on oversweetened champagne and admired the cosmic wallpaper. The preceding tale references a device known as the Paradise Engine, which was discovered during a routine inspection of the interstellar cruise liner Paradiso's cargo hold, following its arrival from Proxima Centauri b. The vessel's manifest listed it as Astronautic Storage Unit, Class A biofuel. Initial attempts to open the fuel chamber resulted in violent resistance and interference from ship personnel, accompanied by an intense olfactory assault and a surge of energy output exceeding Paradiso's auxiliary power reserves for 12 minutes before stabilization protocols could be engaged. The Paradise Engine is a large cylindrical vat measuring approximately 10 meters in diameter and 3 meters tall. The vat itself appears to be constructed from a non-ferrous metal alloy, exhibiting properties consistent with both high tensile strength and exceptional thermal conductivity, though its precise composition remains unknown. The interior surface is smooth and polished to a mere sheen, reflecting light with minimal distortion. It was operating while filled with a viscous amber fluid that reaches a depth of approximately 1 meter. Within the fluid are numerous humanoid creatures numbering 96. Each creature measures roughly 1.5 meters in height and exhibits grotesque features. Elongated limbs terminating in 3-fingered hands, bulbous heads with no discernible facial features save for 2 large black pits where eyes should be, and a thin layer of translucent skin stretched taut over protruding bone structures. The most distinctive feature of the creatures is the pulsating yellow sac, located centrally on its chest and abdomen. These sacs expand rhythmically in unison, emitting a faint luminescence that bathes the interior of the vat with an eerie golden glow. The frequency and intensity of this pulsing directly correlates to the energy output measured from the interface connecting the vat to Paradiso's main power core. When exposed to air for extended periods, the Paradise Engine emits a strong odor reminiscent of overripe bananas, compounded with notes of burnt sugar and sulfurous fumes. This scent intensifies proportionally to the level of agitation within the vat, which manifests as increasing pulsing frequency and erratic movements among the creatures. The Paradise Engine is located within a reinforced steel chamber aboard the interstellar cruise liner Paradiso on the lowest deck of the ship. The chamber maintains an internal pressure of 1.2 atmospheres and is sealed with 2 airtight blast doors equipped with emergency manual overrides. The interior temperature is kept at 34 degrees Celsius within 2 degrees of deviation, humidity at 85% with 5% deviation, and a constant low-frequency hum of 60 Hz is emitted to minimize agitation within the vat. A team of 4 researchers are assigned daily shifts for monitoring the Paradise Engine. Their primary duties include observing the behavior of the creatures within the vat, recording any significant changes in their movements or pulsing patterns, maintaining a log of energy output readings from the interface connecting the Paradise Engine to Paradiso's main power core, monitoring and adjusting internal chamber humidity levels as needed, conducting routine air filtration cycles through activated charcoal filters designed to neutralize the odor produced by the creatures when exposed to open air. While none of Paradiso's staff were forthcoming with information, The head researcher now involved provided an interview regarding the Paradise engine and its operational significance to the vessel. Excerpts are as follows. We refer to them aboard ship as the Bloom. It's unsettlingly poetic when you consider what they actually are. They're not dead, not exactly, more like suspended animation fueled by a constant state of mild distress. The yellow sacs on their chests, those are bioluminescent organs that generate an incredibly potent form of energy we call bloom light. It's clean, efficient, and frankly miraculous for interstellar travel. And the odor? Yes, the banana bloom. A bit pungent when things get agitated in there. We've theorized it's a byproduct of their metabolic process under stress. Not pleasant, but hardly unbearable with the filters running. Do you have any idea what they are? That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? The original manifest called them Class A biofuel. No further details beyond that. We've run scans and biopsies, nothing conclusive. They seem to be entirely unique when compared with anything else in our solar system. And their lifespan? Well, we haven't had the pleasure of observing what we would call a full lifespan yet, but based on our readings and the rate at which they're consumed by Paradiso, I estimate it takes roughly 3 years for an individual bloom to completely exhaust its energy reserves. Then, well, let's just say their luminescence dims considerably before going into a state of torpor. And what about the ethical implications of using them as fuel? Ethics on a luxury liner hurtling through space. It's complicated. We try to keep their distress levels low. The constant hum in the chamber helps with that. And frankly, they seem far more resilient than we initially gave them credit for. They don't scream or bleed when the energy siphoning starts. They just pulse faster. Pulse faster and smell like burnt bananas? Indeed.